Zeus is remembered as thunder made flesh, a figure seated above the clouds, watching a finished world bend beneath his will. That image feels ancient, permanent, unquestioned. Yet permanence in myth is often an illusion created after the struggle has ended. Before temples rose and names hardened into scripture, power did not wear a crown. It existed quietly, without worship, without certainty, shaping reality long before anyone thought to rule it. The stories most people inherit begin at the moment of victory. They open after the noise fades, when order has already been declared. What came before is shortened, simplified, or pushed into shadow. Earlier powers are turned into monsters, or forces of chaos, or curiosities best left unexplored. Not because they lacked importance, but because remembering them fully would weaken the authority of those who followed. If Zeus appears inevitable, it is because inevitability was written backward. His rise feels natural only because the older world was gradually stripped of detail. The farther back the story reaches, the quieter it becomes. Thunder gives way to silence, faces dissolve into presences. Names lose their edges, until only sensations remain. Vastness, darkness, depth, emergence. In that earlier universe, power was not command, it was existence itself. There was no throne because there was no need to rule. Nothing competed, nothing disobeyed. Reality unfolded rather than obeyed. Later generations would mistake this absence of hierarchy for disorder, but it was something far stranger. It was a state where creation did not yet fear replacement, where nothing measured itself against the future. As myths were retold, that world became uncomfortable. It offered no heroes, no clear villains, no final victory. So it was rewritten, layers were added, lineage replaced presence. Power was given faces, then families, then tempers and desires. By the time Zeus emerges, the universe already understands dominance, already fears succession, already believes someone must be in control. That belief is the quiet inheritance of forgotten ages. Every time Zeus is described as the first true ruler, something older is pushed further away. Not erased entirely, but softened, blurred, made abstract enough to ignore. These earlier forces were not defeated in battle, they were edited out through retelling. What survives is a cleaner story, one that reassures rather than unsettles. A sky ruled by lightning feels safer than a universe ruled by nothing at all. Order comforts, mystery disturbs. And so the memory of power changed shape. It became personal, it became loud, it became male, visible, dramatic. But beneath that familiar image, the older question waits. If Zeus rules because order demands a ruler, then what ruled before order learned its own name? What held the universe together before authority required obedience? The answer does not announce itself. It lingers in the gaps between myths, in the silence before thunder, inviting the listener to drift backward into a time when power had no voice and no desire to be remembered. It is in that backward drift that the story truly begins, not with lightning or war or rebellion, but with a universe that does not yet argue with itself, a cosmos that expands without intention, where power does not demand attention because nothing is threatened by its presence. This older beginning feels distant because it resists storytelling. It offers no lessons, no moral balance, no clear shape to remember, yet it is there, beneath every later myth, supporting them like a forgotten foundation. To approach it is to move away from certainty and closer to unease. The listener may sense that something essential has been overlooked, not by accident, but by necessity. For if the earliest power had been fully remembered, the authority of later gods would feel fragile, even temporary. And so the tale pauses here, gently loosening the grip of familiar images, allowing the mind to slip further back, toward beings who shaped existence before gods required belief. Before there were rulers, there was no sense of ruling at all. The universe did not wait for permission to exist, nor did it require guidance. It expanded quietly, without intention or resistance, unfolding as naturally as breath. There were no names yet, no identities to preserve, no victories to defend. Power was not something held. It was simply the condition of being present. In this earliest time, reality was shaped by vast presences rather than decisions. Darkness was not feared. It was space. Depth was not danger. it was possibility. Movement did not follow desire, because desire had not learned to separate itself from creation. Nothing ruled because nothing opposed anything else. The universe was not peaceful. It was neutral, untouched by judgment or hierarchy. Later stories would try to give these forces faces and titles, but doing so changes their meaning. These were not gods waiting for worship. They were states of existence so large they could not recognize themselves as entities. They did not act, they occurred. To imagine them arguing or commanding is to misunderstand their nature entirely. They were inevitabilities, not authorities. In this world, power could not be stolen or challenged because there was no boundary between what existed and what could exist next. Everything belonged to the same continuous movement. Time did not move forward with intention. It widened. Moments did not replace each other. They layered, deepening reality rather than escaping it. This is why later generations struggled to describe this age. It offered no drama, no conflict, no lesson to extract. Human language searches for purpose, yet this universe had none to declare. It did not need balance because nothing yet leaned too far in any direction. It simply was. But within that vastness, change was already present. Not as ambition, but as differentiation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, parts of existence began to notice other parts. The moment awareness flickered, however faintly, separation became possible. And where separation exists, comparison follows. This was not rebellion. It was emergence. Boundaries formed gently, like mist collecting into shape. Conditions that once filled everything began to feel localized. Darkness gathered, depth settled. Space felt heavier in some places than others. With that quiet shift, the universe took its first step toward structure. Nothing broke, nothing fell, yet something irreversible occurred. Once existence could be experienced differently from itself, power no longer belonged everywhere equally. It began to concentrate, not through force, but through attention. The universe was still not ruled, but it was no longer entirely formless. In that subtle change, the future waited. Not loudly, not impatiently, but inevitably. As soon as existence could be perceived, it could be measured. As soon as it could be measured, it could be compared. And once comparison began, the conditions were set for hierarchy, memory, and inheritance. The listener may feel the strangeness of this moment precisely because it resists drama. There is no throne, no decree, no act of domination to mark the shift. Only a slow narrowing of infinity. A gentle movement from everywhere to somewhere, from presence without shape to power with edges. From here, the story cannot remain this quiet for long. Definition brings form, and form invites ownership. As existence continues to condense, it prepares itself for names, for lineage, for beings who will believe that power can be held. The universe is still innocent of rule, but it is no longer unaware of itself. It pauses here, suspended between formlessness and intention. What comes next will feel inevitable, but inevitability is only clear after transformation has occurred. As awareness sharpens, power will begin to gather around identity, and identity will demand protection. The quiet age will fade, not through violence, but through definition, as existence learns to recognize itself, and in that recognition, prepares the first shapes of rule, leaving behind a universe that once needed nothing but presence alone before. Definition changed everything. Once existence learned to recognize itself, it began to organize. What had been endless presence slowly folded inward, gathering around shape, around pattern, around continuity. The universe did not choose order, but order emerged, quietly, like a shadow forming, where light repeats often enough. Out of this narrowing came the first sense of before and after. Not time as a river, but time as inheritance. What existed now could persist later. What formed could endure. In that realization, power took its first confined shape. It was no longer everywhere at once. It rested, settled, and lingered. These earlier structured beings were not rulers yet. They did not command storms or decree law. They were stabilizers, anchors in a reality that had learned to differentiate itself. Their presence brought continuity, and continuity introduced memory. Memory, in turn, created attachment. For the first time, something could be lost. With loss came protection. With protection came possession. Power, once neutral, began to feel personal. It mattered who existed first, who emerged from whom, and what would remain when one presence receded. Lineage formed not as ambition, but as reassurance. To continue was to survive. To be replaced was to vanish. The universe, once vast and unconcerned, now resembled a family. Relationships formed not from affection, but from proximity and origin. Creation became intimate, almost fragile. Each new emergence carried both promise and threat. What was born extended existence, yet also narrowed it, concentrating power rather than expanding it. This was the first quiet tension. No wars erupted, no voices clashed, but the atmosphere thickened. Awareness brought comparison, and comparison brought hierarchy. Some presences lasted longer, some influenced more, some became central. Authority was not announced, yet it was felt. In this age, power learned a dangerous lesson. If it could be passed down, it could also be taken away. Continuity revealed its opposite. Permanence implied endings. And endings introduced fear, not of death, but of replacement. The universe had crossed a line it could not uncross. What once unfolded freely now required guarding. Existence began to lean inward, defensive, without realizing it. The idea of succession cast a long shadow, stretching backward as much as forward. Every emergence became measured against what already existed, not welcomed as part of an endless whole. This is where later divine anxieties trace their roots. The paranoia of future gods did not appear suddenly. It was inherited, quietly, from this first moment when power became specific. When something belonged to someone, it needed to be protected. When it needed protection, it could be threatened. Nothing here is named, because names come later. What matters is the pattern. Creation tightening into continuity, continuity forming attachment, attachment birthing fear. The universe was still young, but it had learned suspicion. From these early structures, true rule became possible. Once power could be inherited, it could be enforced. Once relationships formed, dominance could be claimed. The First Order did not announce itself with conquest. It emerged as responsibility hardened into authority. The listener may sense how familiar this feels. Families, dynasties, legacies, succession. These human concerns echo something far older. The struggles of later gods, including Zeus himself, are reflections of this first narrowing, this ancient moment when power stepped out of the infinite and learned to belong. From here, the story can no longer remain abstract. Structure invites hierarchy, hierarchy invites rule, and rule demands a ruler. The universe, having learned lineage, now prepares to meet the first beings who will not merely exist within power, but wield it, setting in motion ages that will later be remembered as necessary to overthrow. These rulers will believe their authority is required for survival, not realizing survival has already been reshaped by fear. What began as continuity will harden into command. Responsibility will turn into entitlement. And with that turn, the universe will step fully into history, where power is tested, challenged, defended, and eventually destroyed, leaving behind stories that insist this outcome was always meant to be. Those stories will crown victors, soften origins, and quietly prepare the ground for rebellion to begin again, long before anyone notices the pattern, repeating beneath new names and familiar fears emerging. The age of the Titans begins quietly, without conquest or announcement. By the time later myths remember them, their authority feels immovable, as if the universe simply settled around their presence. They did not overthrow a throne, because no throne existed to claim. Power gathered in them naturally, drawn by scale, endurance, and continuity. The Titans did not rule through fear. They ruled through presence. They were vast enough that resistance never formed as an idea. In this age, stability itself felt eternal. Seasons found rhythm, forces followed pattern, and reality gained structure. For the first time since existence learned form, something like order endured. Later generations would mistake this for tyranny, but tyranny requires opposition. Under the Titans, opposition was unnecessary and unimaginable. Their authority was not enforced, because it was never questioned. They did not demand worship, nor did they need validation. The universe aligned itself around them, as matter settles around gravity. This was not cruelty, it was inevitability mistaken for intention. For countless ages, nothing challenged this balance. Time stretched long and uneventful, which later storytellers found difficult to respect. History prefers conflict, yet this era offered something rarer, uninterrupted continuity. The Titans held the universe together, not by control, but by scale. They were too large to hurry, too enduring to fear succession, and because they feared nothing, they watched for nothing. Within that stillness, stagnation began its quiet work. Absolute stability left no room for adaptation, no pressure to change. What endures unchanged slowly forgets how to respond. The Titans did not notice this danger, because danger had never confronted them. Their reign was successful precisely because it removed urgency from existence. Yet, urgency is what sharpens awareness, and awareness invites transformation. Beneath the calm of the Titan Age, time continued to move. Memory accumulated, lineages deepened, and power remained concentrated. Nothing challenged the Titans, yet the conditions for challenge were quietly forming. An order that cannot imagine its end does not prepare for it. What followed would not arise from rebellion, but from imbalance. The Titans stood unquestioned, immense, and complete, unaware that completion carries its own vulnerability. Their age felt eternal, only because no one had yet imagined an alternative. That imagination, once born, would change everything. For now, the universe remained still, held in place by titanic certainty. But certainty that never questions itself begins to thin. In the long silence of absolute rule, consequences gather without sound. The Titans would not fall because they were cruel or unjust. They would fall because they believed nothing could replace them. That belief shaped their world more deeply than any command. It settled into the structure of reality itself. When power stops listening, it does not hear the future approaching. The Titan Age felt unmoving, yet time never truly stands still. It only waits for imbalance to make motion unavoidable. As the Titans held everything in place, something small was already slipping free, not through defiance, but through difference. From stability emerged contrast, and from contrast, the possibility of change. The universe does not rebel against order, it evolves around it, and evolution is rarely gentle to what believes itself finished. The Titans embodied authority so completely that authority could no longer adapt. In time, that stillness would draw attention from within their own creation. What comes next does not arrive as war, but as realization. A realization that absolute order carries the seed of its undoing. The Titans will not hear this realization when it begins. They remain vast, silent, and certain. But the universe, once aware, never forgets imbalance. From within the calm of their reign, the conditions for disruption continue to deepen. Soon, power will begin to move in ways the Titans never needed to imagine. And when it does, the age of unquestioned authority will quietly start to fade. Not with violence, but with the slow realization of change. Immortality did not free the Titans from worry. It refined it. To live forever is to watch patterns repeat without end, to sense change long before it announces itself. The Titans ruled across ages so vast they lost edges, and in that span, time became something to observe rather than escape. They could not die, yet they could be replaced, and the difference between the two slowly began to matter. Whispers entered the stillness of their reign. Not rebellion, not ambition, but prediction. The future started to feel readable, as if events ahead cast faint shadows backward. A suggestion here, a warning there. Nothing concrete, yet nothing easily ignored. For beings who had never been challenged, even the hint of succession felt like intrusion. Fear rarely arrives as panic. It appears as vigilance. The Titans began to watch more closely, measuring what emerged and what followed. Lineage, once a quiet continuation, became something that required oversight. Authority shifted inward, tightening rather than expanding. Protection replaced creation as the dominant impulse. Power, when shaped by fear, changes its texture. It stops supporting growth and starts preventing deviation. The Titans did not suddenly become cruel. They became careful. Each careful act narrowed possibility and each narrowing increased anxiety. The universe felt heavier, less forgiving, as if stability were being preserved at the cost of breath. Violence did not erupt without reason. It arrived wrapped in justification. A future imagined was enough to warrant action in the present. Potential became threat, difference became risk. The Titans, immense and eternal, acted not out of malice, but out of the belief that continuity required control. This is how fear reshapes authority. It convinces power that restraint is weakness and mercy is exposure. Acts meant to preserve order slowly transform into oppression, not because rulers desire suffering, but because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. In trying to secure tomorrow, they begin to damage today. Trust erodes quietly under such pressure. When foresight replaces openness, every emergence is suspect. The universe, once held gently, is gripped instead. The Titan's world becomes precise, guarded, less alive. What was stable now feels brittle. Immortality sharpens fear, because there is always more future to lose. The longer power endures, the more it imagines what could undo it. The Titans stood at the height of existence, yet they found themselves looking downward, watching for movement beneath their certainty. This inward turn marks the beginning of the end. Not rebellion yet, not defiance, but imbalance. Power focused on preservation forgets how to adapt. The Titans began shaping the universe around their anxiety, unaware that anxiety itself creates the conditions it fears. As prevention tightens, inevitability grows. What is suppressed does not disappear, it waits. Fear believes it is acting early enough. History suggests otherwise. The Titans, eternal and unmatched, could not see that their greatest vulnerability was not force rising against them, but fear hollowing them from within. And from that hollow space, the first possibility of rebellion quietly took shape. Long before any challenge openly formed, the atmosphere itself began to change. Silence grew watchful rather than calm. Stability felt rehearsed, as though repeating a role it no longer understood. The Titans remained vast, unchallenged in strength, yet something within their world had shifted beyond their reach. Awareness, once diffuse, had become focused elsewhere. Fear cannot prevent imagination, and imagination cannot remain loyal forever. Even without voices raised in dissent, difference was learning to exist unnoticed. In every age, power believes it can see far ahead, yet it is always blind to what grows quietly in its shadow. The Titans did not sense rebellion approaching them. They sensed time behaving differently. That subtle change, barely acknowledged, would soon unravel certainty, opening space for defiance to become possible. Prevention had become their language, and in speaking it endlessly, they forgot how listening once kept the universe alive before decay learned its own patience. The first fractures in an eternal throne do not arrive as explosions. They appear as adjustments, small corrections made in the name of preservation. The Titans believed stability could be maintained through attention and restraint, never realizing that attention itself alters what it watches. Each attempt to secure the future tightened reality slightly, bending it away from openness and toward control. Nothing broke, nothing resisted. Yet beneath the calm, the universe began responding differently, as though noting these changes and recording them quietly for later use. Those unseen reactions would soon matter more than any visible act of power itself. Control reshapes cause and effect in subtle ways. What the Titans tried to prevent, they inadvertently rehearsed. By treating possibility as threat, they taught reality how to imagine alternatives. Concealment replaced openness, and secrecy became strategy. Acts meant to protect order instead created blind spaces where difference could grow unnoticed. The universe learned something crucial during this period, that power focused on prediction becomes vulnerable to surprise. Every correction narrowed freedom, every safeguard increased tension, until stability itself depended on constant interference. Without intending it, the Titans invited change closer by believing permanence required supervision at all times, forever patiently. Whispers became patterns. Patterns became expectations. The Titans did not act out of sudden panic, but out of slow accumulation. Foresight hardened into fixation. What once flowed naturally now required permission to continue. The universe, shaped for ages by their stillness, began to feel constrained by it. In trying to freeze the present, the Titans quietly distorted the future. These distortions were not violent, but cumulative, bending destiny with every protective decision. Each act made survival more necessary than strength alone. Power no longer trusted itself to endure without intervention, and that mistrust reshaped everything slowly, quietly, permanently, over time. The greatest irony unfolded unnoticed. In trying to prevent succession, the Titans created the conditions for secrecy. What could not exist openly learned to exist hidden. Suppression, trained adaptation. The universe responded by growing smaller spaces where expectation failed. These spaces did not challenge authority. They bypassed it. Power remained intact, yet relevance began to thin. From these quiet margins emerged survival strategies unknown to rulers. Difference no longer needed permission to continue existing. Silence became cover rather than peace. The universe was learning how to hide potential without announcing conflict or intent, yet with patience intact and awaiting opportunity. The Titan Age did not collapse through assault. It weakened through miscalculation. Protection became overreach. Order became fragile. What was meant to last forever grew dependent on constant effort. The universe felt this strain long before any ruler acknowledged it. Survival, once automatic, became conditional. This conditional existence allowed something unprecedented to endure unnoticed. A future that required cunning rather than dominance. Strength alone could not guarantee continuation anymore. In hidden places, existence learned restraint. Waiting replaced confronting as the safest response. The universe practiced patience without permission, and patience creates openings eventually when power overlooks them for too long. This is where the age of Zeus truly begins, though his name remains unspoken. Not in battle, not in rebellion, but in concealment. The future learned how to survive by avoiding notice. Survival, not strength, became the currency of change. What lived quietly endured. Those who escaped attention escaped extinction. Power had trained its successor by attempting to suppress it. Prevention became preparation without intention. The Titans never noticed the shift until it was irreversible. Their certainty had dulled perception. Survival waited quietly beneath authority and learned when to remain unseen until conditions aligned naturally beyond anyone's notice, completely silently. The universe now holds its breath. Nothing has fallen. Nothing has risen. Yet the balance has shifted beyond repair. An age that believed itself eternal has introduced its own ending. From this stillness, something new will emerge, shaped not by dominance, but by endurance and awareness. The moment waits, suspended between certainty and disruption. The throne still stands, but cracks exist beneath certainty. The next age will not begin loudly. It will begin by surviving what was never meant to survive. Consideration replaces conquest as history leans forward. The story pauses here deliberately, with the universe watching itself in silence. Zeus enters the story not with thunder, but with absence. His beginning is defined less by what happens than by what is avoided. No celebration follows his birth. No proclamation marks his arrival. The universe does not pause to acknowledge him. Instead, it tightens, alert and watchful, as if aware that something has slipped through unnoticed. He is born into a system designed to erase continuation. Lineage has become a liability, inheritance a danger. To exist at all is to invite destruction. Power, fearful of replacement, has learned to act early. Children are not potential anymore, they are risks. In such a world, survival itself becomes an act of resistance. Zeus is not introduced as strength or promise. He is introduced as vulnerability, a small, quiet presence, concealed rather than raised. His earliest moments are shaped by urgency and silence, by hands that know how easily existence can be undone. Those who protect him do not do so out of hope for the future, but out of fear of what happens when fear goes unchallenged. There is no destiny guiding these choices, only instinct, and perhaps a quiet refusal to let the pattern complete itself again. This is not rebellion. It is interruption. The universe, having learned how to hide possibility, now practices it through him. The world believes succession has been prevented. Power rests easier, convinced its precautions have worked. The absence of a threat is mistaken for safety. In that miscalculation, space opens. Zeus exists not because fate demanded it, but because he was overlooked. his greatest protection is disbelief. He grows outside the reach of authority, shaped by distance rather than dominance. He learns nothing of command or entitlement. He learns instead how to remain unseen, how to wait, how to adapt without drawing attention. These lessons do not appear heroic, they appear fragile, even insignificant. Yet fragility survives where strength attracts scrutiny. In myths that follow, his birth is often framed as clever or foretold, but that certainty is added later. In the moment itself, nothing is guaranteed. Chance matters, timing matters. A single mistake avoided becomes the difference between existence and erasure. Zeus is not spared because he is meant to rule. He is spared because someone hesitates, because attention falters, because fear does not see everything at once. This quiet beginning reshapes the meaning of power. Thunder is loud, but survival is silent. While rulers focus on controlling what they can see, the unseen continues beyond their reach. Zeus's presence is an anomaly, not a challenge. He does not confront authority. He slips past it. In this age, invisibility is more powerful than force. To exist without being measured is to exist freely. Zeus learns the value of obscurity before he ever learns strength. The universe teaches him this lesson gently, through concealment and patience. His life depends not on dominance, but on remaining beneath notice. The audience may feel the tension of this concealment precisely because nothing dramatic happens. No battle is fought, no decree is issued, yet everything shifts. A future thought impossible has been allowed to persist quietly. The system built to prevent succession has failed in the smallest way possible, and that failure matters more than any open rebellion could have. This is the first twist of the new age. Zeus does not begin as a conqueror, or even as a challenger. He begins as something more dangerous to absolute power, a secret. His existence is a flaw in a structure obsessed with permanence, a reminder that control is never complete. From here, the story does not rush forward. It waits. Survival must become something more than endurance. The child hidden from power will eventually need to understand it. For now, he remains unseen, growing in the spaces fear cannot reach. And in that unseen growth, the future quietly prepares to change form, learning how to transform survival into defiance and invisibility into intention. Zeus does not grow beneath banners or prophecies. His world is small, quiet, and deliberately forgettable. While the Titans stand visible against the shape of reality itself, he exists at the edges, where attention thins and authority does not bother to look. In this distance from power, something rare takes shape. He learns before he acts. There are no lessons carved into stone for him, no expectations placed on his becoming. He watches instead. He listens. The universe teaches him not through instruction, but through pattern. He sees how stability is maintained, how fear moves unseen beneath certainty, how control relies on repetition more than strength. These observations settle slowly, forming understanding rather than ambition. The Titans rule openly, their presence unquestioned, their authority assumed. Zeus grows in contrast to that openness. He learns the value of restraint by necessity. Every moment of survival depends on remaining unremarkable. Patience is not a virtue here, it is protection. Waiting becomes a form of intelligence. Power reveals itself differently when one is not part of it. From outside its center, Zeus notices rhythms others ignore. He sees how certainty dulls perception, how rulers stop listening once obedience becomes habitual. What feels unbreakable from within begins to look rigid from afar. Structure, once fixed, shows stress at its edges. He learns that dominance relies on being seen, while influence can exist unseen. Knowledge accumulates quietly, without display. It does not demand action. It waits for relevance. Zeus begins to understand that power often breaks not where it is weakest, but where it believes itself safest. There is no anger yet, no hunger for change, only clarity. Distance sharpens perspective. By not participating in authority, he avoids inheriting its blind spots. He understands how fear tightens systems, how prevention creates patterns, how control must constantly reinforce itself to remain convincing. These realizations are subtle, but they persist. In silence, he learns timing. Acting too early draws attention. Acting too late changes nothing. The space between becomes everything. Zeus does not imagine rebellion as force colliding with force. He imagines it as movement aligned with pressure already present. Knowledge becomes leverage, not weaponry. The universe, still shaped by Titan certainty, offers no immediate opening. Yet openings do not announce themselves. They appear as inconsistencies, as moments where power hesitates or looks away. Zeus learns to notice these moments. He studies the pauses between decisions, the assumptions left unguarded. This quiet education feels almost invisible, even to him. There is no transformation, no clear threshold crossed. Yet something changes. Understanding replaces fear. Awareness replaces urgency. Where the Titans guard the future, Zeus learns to read it. Foresight, once a source of anxiety for rulers, becomes opportunity when approached without control. The audience may sense the tension building precisely because nothing dramatic occurs. Growth happens without spectacle. Knowledge deepens without reward. Zeus becomes dangerous not by acquiring power, but by understanding how it behaves when unobserved. This is the difference between ruling and knowing. Rulers impose order. Observers learn its limits. Zeus does not yet intend to challenge anything. Intention itself requires context, and he is still gathering it. Isolation gives him time to refine perception without pressure to act. Eventually, silence reaches its limit. Observation must turn toward purpose. Knowledge, once enough on its own, begins to seek direction. The distance that protected Zeus now prepares him to move closer. He has learned where power bends, where fear concentrates, where authority forgets to watch. From this quiet ground, intention will form. Not suddenly, not violently, but inevitably. The child who survived by remaining unseen has learned how survival can become strategy. As understanding deepens, patience remains, but it is no longer passive. Silence has finished teaching. What comes next will require choice. Survival keeps the body alive, but imagination is what begins to change the world. At some point, simply remaining hidden is no longer enough. Zeus reaches this quiet threshold without ceremony. He does not declare rebellion or curse the Titans. He only allows himself to consider a forbidden idea. What if endurance is not the end of the story? What if the order that demands invisibility is not permanent? This thought arrives softly, almost reluctantly, shaped by patience rather than anger. The universe does not respond. Nothing changes outwardly. Yet internally, something irreversible begins. It begins without witnesses and permission. This shift is not ambition in the loud sense. It carries no hunger for dominance. Zeus has watched enough to understand how power reacts to threat. Recklessness would erase him instantly. Instead, imagination opens slowly, like a door tested before being crossed. He begins to notice that the Titans are not unbreakable. They are simply believed to be. Their authority rests on acceptance, not force alone. The universe behaves as if they are final. That assumption becomes visible, and once visible, it becomes fragile. It trembles quietly, inviting possibility to take shape where none was allowed before by belief systems. For the first time, Zeus allows himself to imagine absence, a sky without Titans, a future where authority does not feel immovable. This imagining is dangerous, not because it inspires action, but because it dissolves certainty. Rebellion has always failed before it begins, because no one believed anything else could exist. Power has survived by occupying the limits of thought. Zeus senses that these limits are self-sustained. If belief shifts, power must adjust. That realization settles quietly, changing the meaning of possibility. It transforms survival into intention, without force or spectacle, or noise, or prophecy, yet entirely real now. Nothing outward announces this moment. Zeus remains hidden, unchanged in posture and behavior. The shift is internal, almost philosophical. Endurance quietly evolves into preparation. Silence becomes deliberate rather than defensive. He begins to think not in terms of escape, but in terms of alignment. The Titans are vast, yet they move slowly. Their certainty prevents flexibility. Zeus sees that systems built on permanence cannot pivot easily. The idea of change no longer feels abstract. It feels patiently achievable. Time itself seems to lean forward with him. waiting for belief to loosen its grip on what was once unquestioned forever assumptions. This is the true turning point. Not strength rising, but belief softening. The Titans still rule, yet their rule now depends on assumption. Zeus understands that no ruler falls by force alone. Authority collapses when imagination escapes containment. The unthinkable becomes conceivable. Once conceived, it cannot be unseen. Defiance at this stage is not an action. It is a fracture in certainty. Power can endure fear. It cannot endure disbelief. That distinction becomes clear, and it changes everything. Without raising a voice or lifting a hand, the balance begins to shift quietly within thought itself. Unseen, irreversible from point onward. The audience is invited to feel this moment rather than witness it. Nothing explodes. No order breaks. Yet something ancient loosens its grip. The Titans remain vast, but they are no longer inevitable in the mind. Once inevitability cracks, power begins to move. Not violently, not immediately, but directionally. Zeus has not rebelled. He has imagined rebellion. That is enough. History does not change when swords rise. It changes when certainty falls. From this subtle collapse, alliances will eventually form. Because imagination rarely survives alone for long. It searches for reflection, recognition, and shared intention before action ever follows next. The belief that once held, the universe still has begun to thin. Zeus stands at the edge of that realization, patient and alert. Defiance is now possible, though nothing yet demands it. The throne remains occupied, but its permanence has been questioned. This is how change truly starts, not with armies, but with a thought that refuses to disappear. The universe listens when belief falters. Power senses it too, though too late. The story moves forward, quietly, toward connection and alliance, where solitary insight becomes shared resolve over time, and survival transforms fully into deliberate action without returning to silence. War did not arrive announced. It crept in through disbelief, through a moment when certainty hesitated and failed to respond with force. The universe had grown used to stillness, shaped by authority, and when that stillness shifted, no one recognized it as the beginning of conflict. Silence had ruled for so long that its disturbance felt unreal, almost inappropriate. The Titans did not expect opposition, and expectation shapes reaction more than strength ever does. The first acts were small, uncertain, easily dismissed. Movements that did not fit established patterns, resistance that did not look like rebellion. The Titans watched rather than struck, assuming this disturbance would correct itself. Their authority had never required urgency. Nothing had ever demanded it. That assumption created space, and space allowed momentum to gather quietly. When confrontation finally occurred, it carried no triumph. There was shock instead. Ancient beings faced defiance from those they had never considered opponents. The impossible did not announce itself with spectacle. It revealed itself through hesitation. Power paused, and in that pause, balance fractured. This was not war, as later generations would imagine it. There were no clean sides, no heroic clarity. Reality itself began to strain. Forces collided that had never tested each other. Structures formed in stability now bent under sudden pressure. The universe did not burn, it wavered. Familiar rhythms lost coherence. Time felt uneven, as if unsure which future to support. The Titans did not fall because they were weaker. They faltered because they could not believe challenge had arrived. Their strength had been shaped by certainty, not readiness. When belief collapsed, response lagged. Zeus and those aligned with him did not overwhelm through power. They disrupted through presence. They existed where existence was denied. The first confrontations carried grief more than rage. An age realized it was ending before it knew how to defend itself. Authority confronted its own limits and found them closer than expected. The Titans acted late, adjusting to a war already underway in perception if not yet in destruction. Violence followed, but it was not glorified. Each strike reshaped reality unevenly. Nothing healed cleanly. The universe learned trauma, something it had avoided until now. Stability gave way to consequence. Immortality did not protect against damage. It only ensured damage lingered longer. The most unsettling truth emerged slowly. The war did not begin because Zeus was powerful. It began because the Titans hesitated to believe in opposition. Their disbelief was more damaging than any weapon. By the time they responded fully, imbalance had already spread. Authority that reacts instead of anticipates has already conceded ground. This war felt wrong to those inside it. Order resisted disruption instinctively, yet disruption continued. The universe did not choose sides easily. It reeled. For the first time since rule began, outcomes felt uncertain. Power was no longer self-justifying. It had to prove itself under pressure, and proof arrives late. The Titanomachy was not spectacle. It was collapse experienced from within. Ancient beings confronted change that had been unthinkable. They did not fear defeat at first. They feared meaninglessness. If rule could end, what had it ever guaranteed? That question echoed through every clash. As disbelief dissolved, commitment followed. War became unavoidable once belief fractured. Balance could not return to what it had been. The universe had crossed a threshold that would not reverse. Silence had turned into conflict not through aggression, but through recognition. The audience is left here, suspended inside that realization. The war has begun, but its outcome is not yet decided. What matters now is not force, but how imbalance will be used. Power has paused, and in that pause, strategy replaces certainty. The next movement will not be about who is strongest, but who understands where pressure already exists, and how to let it continue working until collapse feels inevitable. If the Titanomachy were decided by force alone, it would have ended almost as soon as it began. The Titans embodied power, refined by ages of certainty. Their strength had shaped reality itself, settling mountains, fixing cycles, defining limits. Zeus did not surpass that strength. He never needed to. The war turned not on power multiplied, but on power redistributed. For ages, the Titans ruled alone, not cruelly, not obsessively, but exclusively. Authority had no need to share itself when nothing demanded participation. Over time, this isolation became structural. Power flowed in a single direction, upward and inward, until it no longer circulated. What was contained grew stagnant. What was excluded waited. Zeus understood this long before battle revealed it. Strength that does not connect becomes predictable. Predictability creates vulnerability. The Titans commanded everything, yet they commanded alone. There were forces beneath their rule that had been suppressed, forgotten, or locked away, not destroyed, but held in suspension. These forces remembered imbalance. They remembered resentment. Most importantly, they remembered how much power had once moved more freely. The shift came when relevance returned to what had been denied it. Zeus did not confront the Titans directly. He moved through the spaces they no longer governed fully. He listened where authority had stopped listening. Old grievances, once silenced by stability, resurfaced quietly. Imprisoned forces did not need convincing. They needed opportunity. Forgotten powers did not require allegiance. They required acknowledgement. This is where the war truly changed shape. Strength alone could not hold against multiplicity. The Titans had shaped an order that relied on singular control. Zeus introduced dispersion. Power no longer stood concentrated in a few immutable presences. It began to circulate again, unevenly, unpredictably. Control fractured into movement. The Titans fought as rulers defending permanence. Zeus fought as an organizer of imbalance. He did not replace their dominance with his own. He undermined the very idea that dominance must be centralized. Where the Titans were immense, Zeus became adaptive. Where they stood fixed, he allowed pressure to travel. Every alliance exposed the Titans further. Their authority had assumed loyalty as a condition of existence. When that assumption failed, isolation became visible. Ruling alone had worked only as long as nothing resisted. Once resistance appeared, solitude became weakness. The audience may feel the shift as subtle rather than explosive. No single moment decides the war. Momentum gathers unevenly. Power disperses across beings who had long waited without voice. The Titans face not a rival, but a network. Their strength collides with coordination and finds no clear target. This is the great twist of the conflict. Zeus does not win by becoming stronger than the Titans. He wins by making strength insufficient. The rules change without announcement. Authority cannot respond to what it cannot isolate. The Titans strike hard, but each strike lands within a system that absorbs impact rather than breaks. Isolation reveals itself fully now. Rulers who never needed allies suddenly find themselves surrounded by forces they no longer recognize. Certainty dissolves under complexity. What once obeyed because it had no alternative, now moves because alternatives exist. The war accelerates, not because violence increases, but because inevitability shifts sides. Power that once felt immovable begins to scatter. Every effort to restore control exposes how fragile concentration has become. Monopoly collapses when choice reappears. From this point forward, the outcome cannot be undone. Strength remains vast, but it no longer dictates direction. Authority persists, but it no longer defines reality alone. Momentum belongs to movement, not mass. The universe responds to this redistribution with irreversible change. What was once static now flows. What stood above now must contend with below. The war has crossed its final threshold, not through force, but through structure. From here, the fall of the Titans is no longer a question of whether, but of how long stability can survive after being outgrown. The war ends not with relief, but with silence. The Titans fall, yet the universe does not celebrate. There is no sense of return, no feeling that balance has been restored to something familiar. What follows feels altered, quieter, in a way that carries weight rather than peace. The age that once felt eternal does not shatter. It recedes, leaving behind impressions that cannot be undone. Victory arrives unevenly. Some structures collapse suddenly, others linger, half present, half remembered. The universe bears marks it will not forget. Stability, once enforced through immobility, has been replaced by something unsettled. Power has moved, but movement itself leaves scars. Reality feels changed at a foundational level, as though it has learned how fragile permanence truly is. Zeus does not stand triumphant over ruin. There is no moment of pure ascent. What replaces the Titans is not clarity, but responsibility. He inherits a universe reshaped by conflict, carrying echoes of what it endured. The weight of rule does not feel earned through righteousness, only through survival and adaptation. Victory has been achieved, but innocence has not survived the process. The Titans fall because their order could not adapt, not because it lacked purpose. Their reign had meaning once. It offered stability when chaos threatened to overwhelm existence. Now that stability has been dismantled, the question lingers uncomfortably. Was the universe improved, or merely rearranged? Power has changed hands, but the conditions that shaped it remain. This is the quiet discomfort that follows every overthrow. The methods of the fallen do not disappear with them. Control leaves residue, fear echoes. Structures built to prevent loss do not dissolve easily. Zeus stands at the center of a transformed order, aware that what he has undone once protected the world from something worse, and that what he now builds may one day require undoing as well. The audience is invited to sit with this uncertainty. There are no clean endings here. The Titans are gone, but the cycle that shaped them still breathes beneath reality. Authority has shifted, yet authority itself remains. Zeus's ascent is neither purely heroic nor purely destructive. It is necessary, but necessity does not equal virtue. The universe feels older now. It has experienced collapse from within. It knows that no structure is permanent, that no ruler remains untouched by the conditions that raise them. This knowledge lingers beneath the new order, unseen but active. Zeus inherits not only power, but memory. Memory of fear, of suppression, of survival, achieved through force and manipulation. The fallen Titans are reframed by time. No longer rulers, they become warnings. Yet, warnings rarely prevent repetition. They are interpreted through distance, softened by myth, reduced to obstacles rather than predecessors. In this reframing, the cycle prepares itself to repeat. Zeus's rule begins under this shadow. He has learned how authority collapses, but that knowledge does not free him from authority's demands. To rule is to manage fear, expectation, and continuity. The universe now looks to him for order, just as it once looked to the Titans. The shape of power has changed, but its weight remains familiar. There is no certainty that the new age will break the pattern. Consideration replaces conquest, yet control still underlies stability. Zeus stands at the threshold of governance, carrying lessons forged in collapse. Whether those lessons will alter the cycle or refine it remains unanswered. The war has ended, but consequence does not end with war. It stretches forward, shaping decisions yet to be made. The Titans are gone, but their methods echo subtly within the structures that replace them. This is how power persists, adapting rather than vanishing. With the fall complete, the universe waits again, not in stillness, but in expectation. Rule must now be established, order defined, authority justified. The next age will promise harmony, yet harmony often disguises control. As silence settles over a changed reality, the story turns toward what rises next. The throne stands empty only for a moment, and that moment carries the weight of everything that came before and everything yet to follow. After the war, the universe does not return to innocence. It reorganizes. Silence follows conflict, but this silence is different from the one that came before. It carries intention. Out of fractured reality, Olympus begins to rise, not as a reward for victory, but as reassurance against instability. Heaven is not discovered, it is constructed. Olympus is designed to be seen. Its height matters, distance matters, separation becomes symbolic. What was once scattered by war is now gathered into form. Thrones appear where none were needed before. Roles are defined, names assigned, boundaries drawn. Order does not emerge naturally. It is arranged carefully, layer by layer, until authority looks inevitable again. Zeus does not claim power through force. Force has already exhausted itself. Instead, legitimacy is shaped through narrative. He becomes ruler because the universe needs a center, and he occupies it convincingly. The gods who gather around him do not resemble rebels anymore. They resemble administrators. Each carries responsibility, domain, function. Chaos is not destroyed. It is divided, categorized, managed. This new order feels calm, even beautiful. After disorder, structure offers relief. After uncertainty, hierarchy feels stabilizing. The audience is invited to notice how quickly authority becomes familiar when it promises safety. Olympus presents itself as balance restored, yet restoration always chooses what to preserve and what to leave behind. Rules replace instinct. Laws replace memory. What once flowed freely now moves according to design. This design is not cruel, but it is firm. Olympus does not ask whether structure should exist. It assumes it must. The universe accepts this assumption willingly, tired of upheaval, grateful for clarity. Yet clarity has weight. Every system that organizes also restricts. The gods do not simply embody forces, they regulate them. Responsibility becomes control, quietly. Domains are assigned not only to empower, but to limit overlap. Order functions best when boundaries hold. Zeus stands at the center of this system not as a conqueror, but as a guarantor. His authority rests on agreement more than dominance. Gods acknowledge his role because coordination requires a reference point. The universe allows it because uncertainty has proven costly. Olympus feels necessary, not imposed. This is how power stabilizes itself after collapse. It explains its presence as prevention. Never again chaos, never again war. These promises echo through the new structures, even when unspoken. Authority begins to feel protective rather than dominant. That perception matters more than intention. Yet something subtle shifts in this careful construction. Structure becomes permanence by default. What is organized once tends to remain organized. Flexibility narrows as roles solidify. Innovation gives way to preservation. Olympus may be younger than the Titans' reign, but it learns their lessons quickly. Stability becomes something to defend, not revisit. The audience may feel the comfort of this new order and the unease beneath it at the same time. Olympus works. That is what makes it powerful. It solves problems, distributes responsibility, reduces unpredictability. But solutions have side effects. Once authority is formalized, it must justify itself continuously or fear its own unraveling. Hierarchy reshapes relationships subtly. Gods become aware of rank. Proximity to the center matters. Distance gains meaning. Control does not arrive suddenly. It seeps into structure as necessity. Olympus does not demand obedience openly. It normalizes it. This is the transformation that follows every great collapse. Heaven rises not because it is perfect, but because it promises order where disorder has just proven destructive. Olympus stands as proof that the universe can be managed, even controlled, if organized correctly. But management is not the same as harmony. As Olympus solidifies, the question becomes unavoidable. What kind of order has truly been built? One that liberates, or one that contains? The ruins of the old age still lie beneath this new heaven, unseen but present, shaping what is possible above them. And so the story leans forward again. With war concluded and structure in place, attention shifts from construction to consequence. Olympus stands tall, but its meaning has not yet been tested. What looks like balance may still be control waiting to be examined. The fall of the Titans does not erase fear, it relocates it. Olympus rises with promises of order, yet beneath its polished structure, familiar anxieties begin to surface. Zeus now occupies the center, once held by those he overthrew, and from that center, the future looks unsettlingly similar. Power brings clarity at first, but clarity sharpens awareness. The higher authority rises, the farther it can see, and the farther it sees, the more uncertainty it detects ahead. Rule does not calm fear, it concentrates it. Zeus remembers what fear did to the Titans. He understands how anticipation can harden into control. Knowledge of collapse does not dissolve anxiety, it refines it. Prophecy lingers again, subtle but persistent. Succession becomes a concept worth monitoring. Rebellion becomes a possibility worth preventing. Olympus has not finished forming before the question arises. How does one protect an order without repeating what destroyed the last one? The gods surrounding Zeus inherit more than domains. They inherit caution. Authority reshapes how they interpret difference, curiosity, and dissent. What once felt like freedom now feels like instability. Olympus was built to prevent chaos, yet prevention requires vigilance. Vigilance demands attention. Attention breeds suspicion. Slowly, the emotional landscape of power familiarizes itself again. This is the quiet repetition that unsettles the audience. The patterns have not vanished. They have reappeared under new justification. Zeus does not act out of cruelty. He acts out of memory. He knows what happens when authority stops anticipating threats. That knowledge shapes decisions before alternatives are considered. Protection becomes priority. Flexibility narrows. Fear, once an enemy of power, becomes its advisor. The gods sense this shift intuitively. Order holds, yet something tightens beneath its surface. Olympus feels secure, but security carries weight. What must be defended must also be watched. What is watched cannot move freely. This is the paradox of stable rule. The new order avoids collapse by controlling possibility. Not realizing control is what invites it. The audience experiences a moment of uneasy recognition here. History has not repeated itself yet, but it is echoing clearly. Zeus may believe he has broken the cycle by decentralizing strength, but fear recentralizes it quietly. Influence gathers inward again, not through dominance, but through caution. The cycle does not announce its return, it resumes politely. Power has changed hands, but fear has not relinquished its position. It simply adapts to new values and new language. Olympus stands firm, yet the future begins to feel conditional again. Authority that survives collapse rarely forgets it. Zeus rules with awareness, and awareness carries shadow. This moment asks its hardest question softly. Did the universe escape the cycle of rulers, or did it refine it into something more enduring, more careful, and harder to confront? With fear now embedded within Olympus, the story leans forward toward consequence. What begins as caution becomes habit. What becomes habit shapes reality over time. The universe listens quietly, waiting to see whether this new order will recognize the pattern beneath its stability, or continue explaining fear as necessity until necessity hardens into destiny once again. At this point, the story slows, not because it has reached an end, but because it stands before a question that refuses resolution. Olympus feels complete. The war is over. Order stands where chaos once spread. Zeus rules from the center of a structured cosmos, surrounded by gods, laws, and domains that promise permanence. This is where most myths choose to stop. Endings are comforting. They suggest the work is done, Yet endings in myth often arrive exactly where questioning becomes dangerous. If Olympus represents harmony, why does fear remain necessary to protect it? If Zeus's rule is just, why must prophecy be watched so closely? These questions do not accuse, they unsettle. They reveal cracks not in the structure of Olympus, but in the story told about it. Myth presents Zeus's reign as culmination, as the final arrangement of power. But culmination assumes completion, and nothing in the universe has ever remained complete for long. The Titans were once presented as eternal. Their fall seemed impossible until it wasn't. Before them, other forces shaped existence without names or thrones, later reduced to abstractions once they no longer fit the story. Each age believed itself to be the answer to instability. Each age spoke with confidence about permanence. Zeus now occupies that same narrative position. This is where discomfort enters, not as doubt, but as recognition. If myth is shaped by survivors, then what we inherit is not neutral memory, but preserved perspective. Stories survive because they support the present order. What challenges that order fades, transforms, or disappears quietly. Olympus is not merely a place, it is a conclusion written into collective memory. The audience is invited to sit with an unsettling possibility. Zeus's reign may not represent the end of divine evolution, but the moment where mythology chose certainty over inquiry, a pause mistaken for resolution. The story ended not because nothing followed, but because the following threatened coherence. This does not condemn Zeus. It humanizes him. His rule exists within conditions, inherited from ages before him. He did not invent the cycle. He stepped into it knowingly, perhaps hoping to guide it differently. Whether that guidance breaks the pattern or refines it remains unclear. The gods beneath Olympus appear stable, yet their stability depends on maintenance. Memory must be shaped. Fear must be managed. Authority must remain unquestioned long enough to feel natural. These are not signs of resolution. They are signs of equilibrium under tension. Late at night, when the edges of certainty soften, this question lingers. If Zeus was not the first ruler, why do we assume he is the last? If power has changed shape before, why should this shape endure forever? The myths offer no answer, only silence. And silence, in storytelling, is rarely accidental. Perhaps Olympus is not the peak of power, but its most refined form. Less violent, more orderly, yet equally invested in preventing its own replacement. Perhaps the gods did not escape the cycle. Perhaps they perfected it. The unease does not demand conclusion. It invites awareness. Myths endure because they explain the world in ways that feel complete. But completeness can be an illusion crafted carefully over time. To question Olympus is not to deny its achievements. It is to recognize that every order believes itself final until change proves otherwise. As the chapter closes, the audience is not offered certainty. Instead, they are offered perspective. Zeus's reign is examined rather than judged. Olympus stands, but its permanence is no longer assumed. The story does not end here. It deepens. What comes next is not about thunder or war, but about memory. About what is preserved, what is erased, and what quietly survives beneath the surface of official stories. With this question lingering unanswered, the narrative prepares to move forward into the long shadow cast by Olympus itself, where myth reshapes truth, and forgotten powers wait patiently beneath the versions of history that chose not to remember them. Every mythology is defined as much by absence as by presence. Long after Olympus rose and order settled into familiar shapes, something else quietly disappeared. Not in fire, not in defeat, but in memory. The stories that survived did so unevenly, preserving some figures in marble and song while allowing others to fade into obscurity. This disappearance is unsettling, precisely because it is silent. Some powers do not fall in battle. They are slowly reinterpreted until they no longer feel relevant. Their names soften into symbols. Their influence is recast as threat, chaos, or abstraction. Over time, temples crumble, not because they are destroyed, but because no one is instructed to remember them anymore. Silence takes their place, and silence is rarely neutral. Myth does not forget randomly. It selects. After Olympus establishes itself, stories begin to narrow. Narratives align with stability, hierarchy, and control. Forces that resist categorization become uncomfortable. Beings tied to cycles, intuition, or raw emergence are reshaped into warnings or metaphors rather than honored presences. What cannot be governed cleanly is rewritten until it poses no question. The audience is invited to notice patterns rather than names. Figures once central become peripheral. Powers once feared become monstrous. Presences once respected become lessons rather than realities. This transformation does not require destruction. It requires repetition. Told often enough, a reduced story replaces a complex one. Absence becomes the evidence. Gaps appear where depth once existed. Questions are no longer asked because answers are no longer provided. The universe feels simpler, cleaner, easier to explain. That simplicity is comforting, but it conceals choice. Someone decided which stories continued and which dissolved. After Olympus rises, history does not merely move forward, it is curated. Memory becomes organized, much like power itself. What survives is what reinforces order. What disappears is what complicates it. This is not cruelty, it is efficiency. Systems preserve what sustains them. The unsettling realization emerges slowly. The gods we remember may not be the most powerful. They may be the most useful. Utility shapes endurance more than strength ever could. Those who fit within hierarchy endure. Those who blur its edges fade. Silence becomes a form of control. What is not spoken loses shape. What loses shape loses influence. Over generations, absence feels natural. Forgotten powers feel mythical in the shallow sense, distant and unreal. Their removal leaves no obvious wound, only a sense that something is missing without knowing what it was. The listener may sense a subtle unease here, not because of what is known, but because of what is not. Myths feel complete until one listens for echoes. For places where stories move too quickly or avoid certain depths. For figures who exist only as threats rather than origins. This absence benefits order. A smaller world is easier to manage. Fewer powers mean clearer lines of authority. Olympus thrives in this clarity. Its hierarchy feels inevitable because alternatives have been softened into irrelevance. Memory has been shaped to support the present. Some gods did not die. They were remembered into silence. Their absence was not violent. It was gradual, polite, and permanent. The world learned to function without acknowledging what had been set aside. This realization does not accuse. It invites awareness. History always favors coherence. But coherence comes at a cost. To remember selectively is to forget deliberately. And deliberate forgetting reshapes reality as effectively as force. Once the audience begins to notice what is missing, another question forms naturally. If some powers vanished because they no longer served the new order, then who benefited from that disappearance? Silence, after all, always leaves space for something else to speak louder. Power does not end with rule. It continues through remembrance. Once Olympus stands secure, authority no longer needs to rely on force alone. Control moves inward, into language, into repetition, into the quiet shaping of stories that explain why the present order exists. The past becomes flexible, not through lies, but through emphasis. Myth begins to smooth itself. Sharp edges fade, contradictions soften. Stories once layered with ambiguity are retold with clarity and purpose. Heroes become clearer. Conflicts gain moral alignment. Chaos is no longer a condition of existence, but an enemy defeated. Complexity becomes inconvenience, and inconvenience rarely survives retelling. Olympus does not erase history aggressively. It refines it. What supports the new order is amplified. What complicates it is minimized. Rivals are no longer alternatives. They are dangers narrowly avoided. Forces that once shaped reality independently are reframed as obstacles overcome by wisdom and strength. The narrative grows confident, orderly, reassuring. This is how memory is edited without appearing altered. Each retelling selects a little differently. Each generation inherits a slightly cleaner version of the past. Over time, uncertainty disappears. Questions lose urgency. The universe begins to feel explained. The audience is invited to notice how this feels. Comforting, even logical. Stories that resolve tension feel complete. Stories that challenge authority feel unfinished. Olympus thrives within this preference. Its dominance is sustained not through fear alone, but through familiarity. People believe what feels coherent. Myth becomes a living system, adapting alongside power. It does not freeze history, it curates it. Moral complexity fades because it destabilizes loyalty. Ambiguity erodes certainty. Clean narratives reinforce trust. The gods appear decisive, necessary, protective. Past conflicts become proof of their right to rule. Zeus's authority endures because it is repeated, not because it is questioned. Lightning may establish dominance once, but consensus maintains it. The throne is upheld every time the same story is told without variation. Memory becomes architecture, supporting power invisibly. This realization lands quietly. Mythology functions less like revelation and more like inheritance. It is history written by those who survived and prospered. That does not make it false, but it makes it partial. Silence fills the spaces where alternative outcomes might have lived. Chaos is reframed as villainy because chaos resists hierarchy. Rivals become threats because alternatives undermine necessity. Stories evolve to justify outcomes that have already occurred. Meaning is applied backward, creating inevitability where contingency once existed. The discomfort here is gentle but persistent. If stories shape belief, then belief shapes stability. Olympus rules not only the heavens, but the narrative surrounding them. What people agree to remember becomes as important as what actually happened. Power learns that control of memory is more efficient than control of bodies. Once belief aligns with authority, resistance loses language. Without language, it loses form. The past becomes orderly enough to support the present indefinitely. Yet something uneven remains beneath this edited memory. The smoothness conceals imbalance. What disappears from story does not disappear from consequence. Absence leaves impressions. The universe remembers what myth removes. With myth exposed as a tool rather than a mirror, attention shifts again. If stories were shaped to support Olympus, then some forms of power must have been especially threatening to that order to require removal. The next absence to examine is not random, but patterned, revealing imbalance that narrative alone could not fully conceal. The disappearance does not arrive as conquest or decree. It unfolds gradually, like a shift in weather that only becomes noticeable once the air has already changed. Older forms of power do not collapse, they are replaced. What once moved through cycles now moves through command. What once responded through intuition now responds through law. The universe does not rebel against this change, it adapts. Elemental forces that once shaped reality through balance begin to feel out of place. Their power is diffuse, relational, difficult to contain. Olympus prefers clarity. Authority functions best when defined, measured, and assigned. As order hardens, anything that cannot be easily categorized begins to drift toward the margins. This is not erasure through violence, it is displacement through relevance. As hierarchy becomes the organizing principle, cyclical power feels inefficient. Wisdom rooted in rhythm gives way to systems built on direction. The universe learns to move forward instead of returning. Progress replaces renewal. Control replaces trust. Many of these older powers are later remembered only as symbols. Their depth is compressed into stories about danger, excess, or chaos. What was once generative becomes something to fear or tame. The shift feels subtle because it happens through redefinition rather than removal. This transformation carries a philosophical weight. Power becomes linear, concentrated, increasingly singular. Masculine-coded authority rises, not because of conspiracy, but because hierarchy, rewards, assertion, and dominance over receptivity and balance. Olympus reflects this change. Its structure mirrors its values. The audience may sense loss without being told what is gone. Something quieter leaves the world. Not strength, but equilibrium. Not influence, but depth. The universe feels more stable, yet less flexible. Stability begins to resemble rigidity. What disappears first is balance. The ability to hold opposing truths, to flow between states, to renew without conquering. These older forms of power did not seek permanence. They accepted transformation as continuity. In an ordered cosmos, that acceptance feels threatening. As Olympus defines authority, these powers simply no longer fit. They are not defeated. They are outdated. And in becoming outdated, they become invisible. What is invisible stops shaping decisions. The haunting implication settles slowly. What was lost may not have been weaker. It may have offered an alternative, a way to sustain order without domination, structure without suppression. The universe moves forward without it, unaware of what it has traded away. In this quieter absence, hierarchy grows confident, mistaking silence for agreement. Without counterbalance, authority begins to speak in a single voice. Harmony is presented as uniformity, and difference is treated as inefficiency. The universe adjusts, because adjustment is what it has always done, but adaptation leaves marks. The older powers once allowed contradiction to exist without resolution. They held tension without demanding victory. With their disappearance, tension must now be resolved, preferably quickly. Order prefers conclusions. Cycles are inconvenient because they resist endings. Olympus favors permanence, and permanence requires limits. This is how balance is lost without being destroyed. It is redefined until it no longer functions. The world becomes easier to manage and harder to renew. Power narrows, sharpens, and accelerates. What cannot keep pace is left behind. Nothing in this transition feels evil. It feels efficient. Yet efficiency has no patience for subtlety. As harmony becomes something enforced, the line between order and control thins. What was once shared becomes centralized. What was once responsive becomes directive. The universe continues, but it continues differently. Depth gives way to height. Relationship gives way to rank. Authority feels cleaner, brighter, more visible. The cost is not obvious, but it accumulates quietly. From here, the story must follow what replaced these older forces. Not chaos, not freedom, but a controlled version of harmony. One that promises peace while quietly limiting motion. Olympus stands as that promise, convincing and complete, as long as no one asks what balance once felt like. It is this controlled harmony that will shape everything that follows. Beneath its calm surface, tension remains, waiting to be noticed. The next chapter turns toward that tension, examining how order disguises itself as balance, and how silence prepares the ground for consequences, yet unseen by those who believe the cycle has ended for good at last now. Olympus did not arrive as peace, it arrived as relief. After ages of upheaval, even control felt gentle. The universe had grown tired of uncertainty, and tiredness welcomed structure. Zeus's rule endured because it answered exhaustion before it promised justice. Patterns returned where chaos once pressed from all sides. Seasons followed rhythms again, and the sky behaved predictably. Gods took roles, limits became visible, and expectations settled into daily life. For mortals, the world finally made sense in ways it never had. This order was not imposed with cruelty. It was accepted with gratitude. Stability feels kind when it follows terror. After collapse, predictability becomes a form of mercy. Olympus succeeded because it met fear where fear lived. It offered reassurance rather than freedom, clarity rather than possibility. These exchanges felt fair to those who had survived chaos. The cost was distant, abstract, and easy to postpone. People rarely question systems that calm their nervousness. Olympus calmed the universe by making outcomes legible. Everything had a place, and everything had limits. That clarity felt like safety, especially to those who remembered uncertainty. Yet peace born from structure always carries conditions. Comfort asks little at first, and then asks more. Order that relieves fear slowly teaches fear to depend on it. Over time, protection becomes expectation rather than choice. What once felt like relief begins to feel necessary. Olympus did not demand loyalty, it normalized it. This distinction explains its endurance better than any battle ever could. When order works, it becomes invisible. People stop noticing what protects them. They notice only when it fails. The subtle danger of Olympus lies here. Peace achieved through structure often masks the loss of alternatives. When options disappear quietly, their absence does not feel violent. It feels orderly. Zeus's rule endured because it made fear manageable, not because it eliminated it. The universe accepted this bargain willingly. What follows now is not condemnation, but inquiry. If peace depends on containment, What happens when what is contained begins to press back? Stability has been understood, and attention now turns toward its cost. Olympus holds itself together through rules that feel eternal. At first, these laws bring calm. They define borders, responsibilities, and limits, reducing uncertainty into something manageable. Over time, however, those same rules harden. What once guided behavior begins to dictate identity, shaping not only actions, but existence itself. The gods discover that freedom changes when order becomes permanent. They are no longer forces that move naturally through the universe. They become functions. Titles matter more than temperament. Domains define worth. To step outside assigned purpose feels less like curiosity and more like threat. Olympus rewards consistency, and consistency favors predictability over transformation. This rigidity does not announce itself as cruelty. It presents itself as necessity. Systems that promise stability must resist disruption, even benevolent disruption. Change becomes something to manage carefully, if allowed at all. What cannot be controlled is discouraged. What cannot be categorized is ignored. Over time, adaptation feels risky, while repetition feels safe. The audience begins to recognize a familiar shape forming. The Titans once believed permanence was protection. Olympus now enacts the same belief with greater refinement. Where Titans relied on immobility, Olympus relies on law. The effect is similar. Stability becomes a fixed condition rather than a living process. Peace depends on containment. Gods themselves feel this narrowing. Roles precede identity. Expectations precede choice. What began as structure slowly becomes confinement. Boundaries that once prevented chaos now prevent growth. The universe looks orderly, yet something within it resists breathing fully. This is the quiet revelation. Permanence is not peace. It is containment disguised as harmony. Order that cannot change eventually stops serving those within it. It serves itself instead. Olympus does not collapse under this realization, but it begins to mirror the very patterns it replaced. Rules stop evolving when authority fears uncertainty. Protection turns into preservation at all costs. The system becomes fragile precisely because it resists modification. Like all closed structures, it depends on denying pressure rather than responding to it. As rigidity sets in, tension does not vanish. It relocates. It gathers beneath obedience, behind silence, within expectation. Olympus remains calm on the surface, but consequence always follows inflexibility. The story now turns toward what happens when what is contained begins to press outward, testing boundaries that were never meant to move. Mortals enter the story quietly, not as participants in divine conflict, but as its inheritance. They live beneath Olympus after the war has ended, after order has been declared complete. From their perspective, the sky no longer changes. It watches. This stillness feels protective at first, like shelter after storm. The gods above have roles, laws, and distance. Humans below receive structure without explanation. Seasons follow patterns. Crops grow or fail according to rules mortals did not write. The world becomes predictable enough to endure, yet distant enough to feel untouchable. Stability arrives without consent, accepted because the alternative once brought devastation. Under Olympus, myth becomes instruction. Stories explain why suffering happens, why reward is delayed, why obedience matters. These narratives do not feel cruel. They feel instructive. Worship becomes negotiation rather than connection. Offerings are given not to commune, but to avoid displeasure. Faith develops edges sharpened by uncertainty. Mortals learn the language of fear early. They are taught what angers the gods, what pleases them, what brings punishment disguised as lesson. Divine attention is unpredictable, yet unavoidable. Benevolence feels conditional. Indifference feels constant. The gods rarely explain themselves, and explanation is not expected. This asymmetry defines existence. Humans labor within rules enforced by beings beyond reach. Justice is experienced, but never argued. Authority remains abstract and absolute. When suffering occurs, it is framed as correction rather than consequence. Mortals adjust themselves rather than question the system that governs them. The cycle the gods could not escape settles into human life. Fear teaches obedience. Reward teaches hope. Punishment reinforces memory. The same patterns that shaped Titans and Olympians now echo through villages and families. Power above becomes belief below. Myth ensures the pattern repeats without requiring direct control. Yet beneath acceptance, quiet tension lives. Mortals sense that order protects them while limiting them. They survive, but rarely choose. Their agency exists within narrow margins. The sky does not move for them. When prayers go unanswered, silence feels deliberate rather than absent. The emotional cost accumulates slowly. Humans learn to blame themselves for divine distance. They internalize responsibility for outcomes shaped by authority they cannot confront. Stability becomes something endured rather than embraced. Harmony feels passive, something received rather than created. Olympus does not appear cruel from above. From below, it feels vast and unreachable. The gods rule without malice, yet without intimacy. Mortals become subjects not through decree, but through inevitability. Their lives are shaped by decisions made elsewhere, long before they are born. This distance breeds dependence. Meaning arrives through explanation rather than experience. Myths tell mortals why things are, not how they might be otherwise. Imagination narrows. Alternatives feel unrealistic. Order becomes the shape of reality itself. The audience is asked to feel this weight. Not outrage, but quiet resignation. A life lived under certainty still asks questions. Stability without agency offers safety at the cost of voice. Protection comes without participation. Peace exists, but it is inherited, not chosen. This raises a deeper uncertainty. If harmony requires obedience, is it harmony or management? If order cannot be questioned, does it serve those within it or only itself? Mortals live within answers they did not request, shaped by powers that fear change as much as they once feared chaos. As the gaze lifts again toward Olympus, the question lingers. What does order mean to those who never chose it? With humans bound beneath an unmoving sky, attention turns toward what even the gods cannot escape. The force that watches rulers as closely as mortals do. The future, named in whispers, waiting to be confronted. Zeus rules from the height of Olympus, yet something unseen stands higher still. It does not speak, does not command, and cannot be challenged. It waits. Long after the Titans fall, and order settles into familiar form, prophecy remains, stretching quietly across every age of power. It does not announce itself as destiny fulfilled. It lingers as possibility unresolved. Victory never erased the future. It only delayed confrontation with it. Zeus understands this instinctively. He overthrew rulers who believed themselves permanent, yet permanence itself remains elusive. The universe feels narrower now, as though time has drawn closer. Every decision echoes forward, and every action seems to brush against something not yet revealed. Prophecy is not prediction in the simple sense. It is pressure, a sense that certain outcomes bend reality toward them, no matter how carefully the present is managed. The irony settles heavily here. Zeus once stood against inevitability, against the idea that the future must unfold according to inherited patterns. Now he rules beneath that same unseen weight. This does not make him cruel. It makes him attentive. Awareness replaces innocence. Zeus watches the world with a ruler's vigilance, listening for signs of repetition. Succession, once a distant concern, becomes immediate. Rebellion, once unimaginable, becomes conceivable. Prophecy does not threaten loudly. It tightens slowly, shaping behavior through anticipation. The universe feels altered by this awareness. Olympus still stands, brilliant and ordered, yet tension coils beneath its harmony. Fate no longer feels abstract. It feels present, hovering just beyond reach. The gods sense it without naming it. Mortals feel it as unease, an impression that outcomes are never entirely chosen. This pressure reframes Zeus's actions. What later stories may describe as paranoia or excess emerges instead as foresight, sharpened by memory. He knows how cycles end. He has watched certainty collapse before. To ignore the future is to invite repetition. Yet to fight it directly is impossible. Prophecy resists confrontation. It does not oppose force. It absorbs it. The future does not rebel. It waits. In that waiting, it shapes the present more effectively than any decree. Zeus rules knowing that his authority exists within time, not above it. This awareness introduces restraint and suspicion in equal measure. Protection becomes a priority, not because danger is visible, but because inevitability is. Every age believes itself unique, until it recognizes familiar patterns returning. The Titans once acted to prevent replacement, convinced that foresight justified intervention. Zeus sees that reflection now, uncomfortably clear. The shadow hanging over Olympus is not an enemy. It is history repeating in advance. The audience is invited to feel the tightening atmosphere. Order remains intact, yet freedom feels narrower. Possibility still exists, but it requires careful navigation. The universe is no longer expansive. It feels observed, as if the future itself is paying attention. This sensation does not demand action immediately. It demands caution. Zeus adjusts, quietly, without announcement. He studies outcomes before they form. He reacts not to events, but to potential. In this way, prophecy reshapes rule without ever issuing a command. As the shadow deepens, the story prepares to move again. Fear begins to influence decisions, not as panic, but as preparation. The future presses inward, and power responds instinctively. With prophecy now present at the heart of Olympus, the narrative turns toward how anticipation transforms authority, and how fear, once again, begins to shape the choices that will define what comes next. This awareness marks a turning point. Power that once reacted now preempts. Silence becomes strategic. Trust becomes measured. Olympus remains calm on the surface, but beneath that calm, the future tightens its grip. Destiny does not rush. It allows rulers to reveal themselves through what they fear most. In watching prophecy shape Zeus, the audience senses that inevitability has not been defeated, only delayed, waiting patiently for belief, choice, and caution to intersect once conditions align. Power rarely waits to be challenged once it has learned how it falls. Zeus rules with the memory of collapse still fresh, not as history, but as instinct. The Titans did not fail because they lacked strength. They failed because they noticed change too late. That lesson settles deeply. The future is no longer something to meet when it arrives. It is something to intercept. Authority becomes proactive. Threats are no longer measured by action, but by potential. What might happen becomes as important as what is happening. Zeus does not wait for defiance to surface. He studies conditions, relationships, patterns of emergence. Anything that resembles the beginnings of imbalance draws attention. Control shifts from reaction to prevention. This feels reasonable. Survival has already proven fragile. Order was nearly lost once. To protect it now seems responsible. Zeus does not see himself as repeating history. He sees himself learning from it. The difference, however, is subtle and dangerous. Power that acts before necessity no longer waits for justification. It creates its own. Potential successors become concerns before they become figures. Lineage is watched. Independence is interpreted cautiously. Difference draws scrutiny, not because it is harmful, but because it is unpredictable. Zeus does not punish rebellion. He prevents it from learning how to exist. The audience begins to recognize the pattern. These are the same justifications once used by the Titans. Fear framed as foresight, control framed as care. The cycle does not announce itself as repetition. It presents itself as refinement. Each age believes it has corrected the errors of the last while, preserving its own advantages. This is the quiet irony. In attempting to prevent overthrow, power begins to resemble what it fears. The methods adapt, become more sophisticated, less visible. Zeus does not rule through immobility. He rules through anticipation. Yet anticipation demands constant vigilance, and vigilance reshapes authority into something tense and inward-facing. Nothing here is framed as cruelty. The tone remains restrained, reflective. Zeus does not enjoy suppression. He believes it necessary. This belief is what makes the pattern so persistent. Systems built on survival logic justify themselves endlessly. Every act of control confirms the need for the next. The fear of being replaced creates replacements. By narrowing possibility, power concentrates attention elsewhere. What cannot emerge openly learns to adapt in silence. Prevention teaches evasion. Control teaches patience. The universe remembers these lessons well. The more Zeus tightens influence, the more the future becomes something external again. Fate, once confronted, returns as consequence. Power reacts to its own anxiety, and in doing so, reshapes the conditions that once led to collapse. History does not need rebellion to repeat. It needs alignment between fear and authority. The gods sense this shift without naming it. Olympus remains orderly, yet the atmosphere grows cautious. Trust becomes conditional. Permission replaces freedom. Stability continues, but it requires effort now. Effort creates strain. Strain invites reflection. The audience is not instructed to judge this moment. Judgment would simplify what is complex. Instead, they are invited to observe. Zeus stands at the center of a familiar pattern, believing awareness will spare him the fate of his predecessors. Yet awareness does not free power from consequence. It only changes how consequence arrives. As fear defines the present, the future remains unanswered. Prevention cannot eliminate possibility. It only postpones it. The universe has learned this before. It watches again as authority shapes itself around anticipation, unaware that anticipation often accelerates what it seeks to delay. With control now actively shaping the present, the narrative turns toward what remains unresolved. The future still waits. Prophecy has not been answered, only managed. The next question is not whether Zeus can prevent overthrow, but whether prevention itself has already written what comes next, silently, patiently, beyond the reach of even the most vigilant ruler. As the echoes of Olympus settle into silence, a realization begins to surface, slow and unsettling. Nothing fundamental has changed. The universe still moves to familiar patterns, still bends beneath the same pressures. Power continues to fear its replacement. Authority still guards itself against renewal. Only the names have shifted, carefully rearranged to suggest progress where repetition quietly persists. The Titans believed they were final. Zeus believed he was different. Each age carries this belief like a shield, convinced awareness alone is enough to escape history. Yet awareness does not dissolve patterns. It only allows them to be recognized while they continue. Olympus does not end the cycle of rule. It pauses it, holding change at bay through refinement rather than rupture. The universe has seen this rhythm before. Order rises from chaos, order stabilizes, stability hardens, fear emerges, control tightens, possibility adapts, collapse follows. Each phase feels distinct while it unfolds, yet together they form something continuous. Zeus's reign fits into this rhythm, not as exception, but as iteration. This is the discomfort the story now asks the audience to feel. Olympus shines because it learned from the past. It corrects errors, smooths extremes, disguises repetition as evolution. Yet the same anxiety sits at its core. The fear of succession has not been resolved, only managed. Authority remains vigilant because it must. Power that relaxes forgets how it falls. If the Titans failed through immobility, Olympus risks failing through overcontrol. Both responses emerge from the same unease. The universe has not found a ruler who does not fear its own ending. Each solution attempts to freeze the cycle at a favorable point, mistaking balance for permanence. The question rises gently now, without accusation. What if the universe never wanted a final ruler? What if authority itself is temporary by design? Not because rulers are flawed, but because power resists enclosure. The cycle may not be a failure. It may be the system functioning as intended. This idea unsettles because it offers no resolution. It suggests that overthrow is not tragedy or triumph, but transition. Each age prepares the next, not by accident, but by necessity. Fear teaches awareness. Control teaches resistance. Stability teaches limitation. The universe learns through repetition. Olympus appears calm, yet beneath its harmony, motion continues. Not rebellion, not prophecy fulfilled, but pressure accumulating. Change does not announce itself in advance. It gathers quietly, where authority is least attentive. The cycle does not rush. It waits. The audience is invited to release the need for conclusion. Stories often promise endings because endings feel safe. They imply mastery, resolution, rest. But the universe does not rest. It reorganizes. Olympus is not an answer. It is a moment. In recognizing this, the listener steps outside the narrative of winners and losers. Power is no longer seen as something to be seized or defended, but as something that moves, reshapes, and dissolves. Zeus stands at the center of this motion, neither villain nor savior, but participant. The haunting truth settles here. Escape from the cycle may not come through better rulers, stronger laws, or clearer myths. It may require abandoning the idea that power must be final at all. Yet myths rarely explore that possibility. It destabilizes too much. And so the cycle continues, not loudly, but persistently. Names change, structures evolve, fear adapts. Olympus stands, but it does not close the story. It holds it in suspension, delaying the next movement without preventing it. As the chapter ends, the universe feels vast again, not because order has failed, but because finality has been exposed as illusion. The ground is prepared for what comes next. Not another war, but a deeper inquiry. If the cycle cannot be broken by power, then what kind of understanding might loosen it? With this question unanswered, the story moves forward into its final reflection, where myth, memory, and meaning converge to ask not who should rule, but why the universe continues to imagine rulers at all. Zeus has ruled longer than any before him, long enough that his presence feels permanent, woven into the fabric of the universe itself. Time has softened the memory of what preceded him, allowing his authority to feel less like a chapter and more like an ending. Yet longevity has never meant finality in this story. It has only meant delay. When the Titans ruled, their age felt endless. Before them, primordial forces seemed beyond replacement. Each era carried the same confidence, reinforced by duration. Power mistakes survival for destiny, again and again. Zeus's reign appears different only because it is familiar, not because it is immune to change. The pattern is difficult to ignore once seen. Power emerges from chaos, stabilizes reality, resists disruption, and eventually collapses under the weight of its own caution. Zeus fits this sequence precisely. His awareness of history does not remove him from it. It places him deeper within it. The universe has never allowed a single arrangement to stand unchallenged indefinitely. Myth, however, presents Zeus as resolution. The stories slow and then stop. Conflict fades, authority settles, the narrative closes as if nothing further needs to be said. This is not because nothing follows, but because what follows threatens coherence. Endings are chosen where questions grow uncomfortable. Greek mythology does not imagine a world after Zeus. That absence feels deliberate. To describe what comes next would be to admit that even Olympus is temporary. It would destabilize the reassurance the story provides. Myths often conclude at the moment where curiosity becomes dangerous to authority. This is the quiet reveal. The cycle does not end with Zeus. The telling does. Storytelling halts where power benefits most from silence. What comes after remains undescribed, not because it is impossible, but because it is unsettling. Futures undermine the present simply by existing. The audience is invited to linger here, not to predict, but to imagine. If every ruler before Zeus fell despite confidence and preparation, then immunity is unlikely. Power systems rarely announce their expiration. They persist until assumptions weaken enough for change to slip through. Zeus's reign may still endure, yet the conditions that ended past ages remain present. Fear of succession, reliance on control, resistance to renewal. These elements do not vanish through awareness. They adapt. Longevity delays collapse, but does not erase its logic. To imagine a future beyond Zeus is not to deny his significance. It is to recognize that significance has never guaranteed permanence. Authority survives through belief as much as strength. Once belief loosens, time moves differently. The myth ends, but the universe does not. Silence takes the place of explanation, and silence invites speculation. What would power look like after Olympus? Would it resemble what came before, or take a form never yet described? Myth offers no guidance here, only absence. That absence is not empty, it is charged. It asks the listener to accept uncertainty without resolution. If Zeus is not the first, he is unlikely to be the last. The pattern has never stopped, simply because it reached a convincing conclusion. With this doubt now present, the story prepares to examine why myths resist continuation. The question of what comes after Zeus is not avoided by accident. It is avoided because it exposes the fragility beneath authority that presents itself as final. Stories have always known where to stop, not because nothing remains to be said, but because saying more begins to unsettle what has already been accepted. In myth, endings arrive at moments of stability. A throne is secured, a ruler is crowned, disorder retreats into memory, the universe exhales, and the story closes, as if that breath will last forever. This ending feels natural because it feels necessary. Chaos is exhausting. Uncertainty demands attention. Cultures, like individuals, seek rest from tension. Myths offer that rest by drawing a line beneath struggle and calling it resolution. Zeus's reign becomes that line. Everything before it is conflict, everything after it is silence. Yet silence is not the same as absence. The universe does not pause simply because a story stops telling. What ends is not reality, but inquiry. Zeus's rule functions as a narrative full stop, discouraging the imagination from moving forward. The story does not continue, not because continuation is impossible, but because it would reopen questions order depends on keeping closed. Endings in myth mirror endings in power. When authority benefits from stability, the future becomes inconvenient. An open horizon suggests change. Change threatens coherence. So stories conclude at points that reinforce permanence, even when permanence has never truly existed. This does not make myth false, it makes it human. Cultures tell stories that allow them to live without constant unease. An unresolved universe feels dangerous. Final rulers feel reassuring. Zeus represents not just authority, but closure. His reign tells listeners that the struggle for order has been resolved, that nothing further needs imagining. The audience is invited to notice how powerful this psychological relief is. A story that never ends demands attention. It refuses comfort. It suggests responsibility. That burden is rarely welcomed. Myth provides release by presenting stability as achieved, rather than maintained. This is where mythic finality and political finality overlap. Both rely on the same principle. When order feels secure, questioning becomes unnecessary, even disruptive. Silence is not enforced through censorship, but through satisfaction. People stop asking because the story feels complete. The realization here is quiet but profound. Zeus's reign does not end because the cycle ended. It ends because storytelling reached a point where curiosity threatened reassurance. What follows Zeus is unknown, not because it cannot be imagined, but because imagining it undermines the comfort the myth provides. Stories end where power wants them to, because power thrives on conclusions. Conclusions suggest mastery. They imply that chaos has been defeated rather than managed. They allow societies to rest, even if rest is temporary. This understanding does not accuse ancient storytellers of manipulation. It acknowledges something deeper. Humans need endings to cope with scale. An endless universe feels indifferent. A universe with a final ruler feels attentive. Zeus offers that attention. Yet beneath this comfort lies tension. If myths stop to preserve stability, then stability itself depends on silence. The future remains unspoken not because it lacks meaning, but because meaning has been declared complete prematurely. With this awareness, the story prepares to shift again. If endings are chosen to protect order, then power itself must be reconsidered. Not as domination, but as agreement. Not as destiny, but as story sustained by belief. Power, once stripped of spectacle, begins to look less like domination and more like arrangement. Zeus does not rule in isolation. His authority holds because it is accepted, repeated, and reinforced across countless interactions. The gods recognize his position because coordination requires reference. Mortals worship because worship offers meaning and protection. Stories endure because they align belief with structure. Together, these forces create the appearance of permanence. This realization softens the image of absolute rule. Power is not seized and held indefinitely. It is sustained moment by moment through participation. When belief weakens, authority thins. When repetition fades, control loosens. Zeus's lightning may inspire awe, but awe alone cannot govern. What governs is agreement, quiet and widespread, renewed daily without ceremony. Every divine age follows this pattern. Primordial forces endured because nothing questioned their presence. Titans ruled because the universe aligned around them. Olympus stands because gods and mortals act as though it must. Power survives as long as people behave as if it does. Once behavior shifts, reality follows. This reframing invites the audience to reconsider history. What looked like conquest now appears as coordination. What looked like obedience now appears as participation shaped by fear, hope, and habit. No god ever ruled alone. Authority was always collective, even when concentrated in a single figure. This does not diminish power. It explains it. Systems function because they are shared. Belief builds structures stronger than force. Zeus's reign endures because it feels natural, inevitable, familiar. Those qualities emerge not from destiny, but from repetition. The more a story is told, the less it needs justification. Yet repetition also reveals fragility. Anything sustained by agreement can change when agreement shifts. Power is stable, but never permanent. It depends on conditions remaining favorable, on fear remaining persuasive, on hope remaining aligned with order. When those conditions evolve, authority adapts or dissolves. This understanding dissolves the myth of final rulers. It replaces inevitability with process. Power becomes something negotiated rather than owned. It rises, stabilizes, and fades as circumstances change. Zeus stands not as an endpoint, but as a participant in this movement. The audience is invited to sit with this quiet transformation. Absolute rulers fade into something recognizably human. Control becomes contingent. Authority becomes relational. The universe no longer feels governed by unchanging forces, but shaped by collective behavior. This does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. If power is temporary agreement, then responsibility spreads. Systems persist because they are supported. Silence sustains order as effectively as obedience. Change begins when participation shifts. The image of Olympus remains, but it feels lighter now, less immovable. Zeus's throne stands because it is recognized, not because it is invincible. The same truth applies to every age that came before him, and every age that will come after. As this realization settles, the story prepares for its final movement. If power is agreement, then meaning does not reside in rulers, but in why agreement forms at all. The final chapter will turn away from gods entirely, toward the deeper question beneath every myth. Not who rules, but why the universe continues to imagine rulers in the first place, and what happens when imagination itself becomes conscious of its role in creating authority across time and memory, endlessly repeated patterns waiting to be noticed. Creation is where the myths begin, but it is not what they are trying to explain. Stories of gods shaping worlds, splitting sky from earth, and bringing order from chaos appear to answer questions about origins. Yet those questions fade quickly once survival replaces curiosity. What endures is not how the world started, but how it continues. Myth exists to make uncertainty livable. Every divine conflict reflects a deeper human concern. Order threatened by collapse, authority challenged by succession, stability eroded by time. These are not cosmic problems. They are lived ones. Myths translate fear into narrative, turning abstract anxiety into characters, battles, and gods who can be watched, blamed, or trusted. The primordial forces represent a world without explanation, vast and indifferent. The Titans embody stability at the cost of stagnation. Zeus represents control refined through awareness. None of these figures are merely rulers of reality. They are expressions of how humans experience power, time, and loss. Myth externalizes internal tension, allowing societies to witness their own struggles from a distance. Creation stories feel important because they establish credibility. They suggest authority begins at the beginning, but beginnings matter less than endurance. What terrifies societies is not how things start, but how they might end. Myth reassures by presenting continuity as guided, even when it is fragile. The gods do not exist to explain existence. They exist to explain survival. When chaos threatens, gods offer structure. When authority fails, gods offer renewal. When loss feels unbearable, gods promise order beyond human reach. Each age shapes its gods according to what it fears most. This reframing dissolves the boundary between myth and humanity. The gods were never external rulers governing from above. They were mirrors, reflecting concerns back to those who told the stories. Zeus did not rule because he existed. He existed because the idea of a ruler was needed. Seen this way, the conflicts of Olympus are not distant legends. They are symbolic rehearsals. Humanity practicing questions it cannot safely answer directly. Who deserves power? How long should it last? What happens when stability collapses? Myth gives shape to these questions without demanding resolution. This is why the cycle persists. Not because gods fail, but because the anxieties they represent never disappear. Authority is needed, then questioned. Order is built, then constrained by fear. Renewal is desired, then resisted. Myth moves through these tensions endlessly, because societies do as well. Creation, in this sense, is merely the opening scene. The true subject is continuity. How to survive uncertainty without being consumed by it. How to live with impermanence, while still building structures that feel safe. The gods exist where language struggles to articulate these contradictions. The audience is invited to feel this shift gently. The story does not dismantle myth, it deepens it. Zeus, Titans, and primordial forces lose some distance and gain intimacy. They feel closer because they reflect something familiar, the fear of loss, the hope of order, the desire for meaning. This perspective does not reduce myth to psychology. It reveals its function. Stories endure because they hold emotional truth. They translate lived experience into symbolic form. Creation myths persist, not because people need to know how the universe began, but because they need to know how to face its uncertainty. With myth reframed as reflection, one constant becomes visible across every age. Fear changes form, but never disappears. It shapes rulers, stories, and belief itself. To understand power, the story must now follow that constant, away from gods and toward the emotion that gives them form. Across every age, beneath every myth, one force remains unchanged. It is not strength, or wisdom, or destiny. It is the desire for certainty. Long before Zeus ruled the sky, and long after his name felt permanent, fear shaped the way stories were told and power was imagined. Not fear as panic, but fear as awareness. The quiet understanding that nothing lasts, that control is fragile, that chaos is always near. When uncertainty feels distant, freedom feels possible. When uncertainty feels close, order becomes necessary. This is where gods are born. Not from lightning or mountains, but from the human need to believe that someone is watching, managing, holding the world together. Zeus does not represent dominance at his core. He represents reassurance, the promise that disorder has been noticed, and that something stands between chaos and collapse. Hope sustains this belief. Not blind hope, but practical hope. The kind that allows people to wake each day and trust the sun will rise, the seasons will turn, and consequences will follow understandable rules. Divine hierarchy offers that trust. It turns randomness into intention. Suffering becomes lesson. Reward becomes justice. Meaning becomes possible. Fear builds rulers. Hope keeps them standing. Together, they create stability that feels emotional before it feels rational. Olympus stands not because it is perfect, but because it satisfies a deep psychological need. The need to know that uncertainty is not absolute. The audience is invited to recognize something familiar here. These dynamics are not ancient relics. They repeat endlessly in different forms. Whenever chaos presses in, order is imagined. Whenever order feels threatened, authority tightens. Gods rise, systems form, rules solidify. Not because the universe demands it, but because consciousness does. Divine hierarchy, seen this way, is not cosmic truth. It is coping strategy, a way to survive awareness without being overwhelmed by it. The gods offer distance between human fragility and the vastness of existence. They absorb fear so mortals can function. In doing so, they become necessary, even when they are flawed. Zeus endures because he offers a center, a point of reference in a world that resists final explanation. He assures that chaos has limits, even if those limits shift. His authority reassures more than it commands. People accept control when it feels protective. They maintain belief when belief eases anxiety. This does not make faith foolish or weak. It makes it human. The universe does not explain itself. Stories step in where answers fail. Rulers appear where randomness feels unbearable. Gods exist because uncertainty, left alone, is too heavy to carry. The subtle realization lands here. The oldest power was never divine authority. It was fear paired with hope. Fear of collapse, hope of continuity. Everything else followed from that pairing. Thrones, myths, hierarchies, prophecies, all expressions of the same emotional need. Understanding this does not remove the need for order. It changes responsibility. If gods rise to meet fear, then fear is the true creator. If hope sustains authority, then belief is active, not passive. Power persists because it is reinforced, not because it is inevitable. Late at night, when certainty loosens, this truth feels closer. The need for order softens into curiosity. Questions become possible without demanding immediate answers. The audience is invited into that space, not to dismantle meaning but to examine it gently. With fear and hope identified as the deepest forces shaping power, the story prepares to close. The gods fade not in defeat but in understanding. Authority becomes reflection. Myth becomes mirror. What remains is responsibility returning to where it began. With those who believe, who hope, who fear, and who imagine order when chaos feels too close to ignore. At the end of the myth, the gods do not collapse. They do not vanish in fire or fade in defeat. They simply fall silent. Zeus does not fall from his throne. He dissolves into meaning. His story completes itself, not because it is finished, but because it no longer needs to speak. What remains is not emptiness, but space. Power was never housed in the heavens. It lived in perception, in memory, in the choices repeated often enough to feel inevitable. The gods were never the source of authority. They were its shape. They gave fear a face and hope a voice. Once that function is understood, the figures themselves are no longer required to stand visibly above the world. Zeus fades as a symbol fulfilled. Not disproven, not overthrown, but understood. His lightning no longer needs to strike because its meaning has already landed. He becomes what all rulers eventually become when examined closely. A reflection of belief that once served a purpose and now rests. The universe does not change dramatically at this realization. Mountains do not move. The sky does not fall. What changes is awareness. The cycle that once felt eternal begins to feel optional. Patterns continue only when they are followed unconsciously. When they are noticed, they loosen. This is the quiet power of reflection. The cycle of rulers persists not because it must, but because it is repeated without question. Once questioned, it cannot fully maintain its shape. Examination interrupts inevitability. Awareness introduces choice. The documentary does not offer a replacement for gods. It offers responsibility. If power is sustained by belief, then belief matters. If authority exists through participation, then participation can change. The future is no longer written by distant figures acting beyond reach. It is shaped by decisions made close, daily, often silently. This realization does not remove uncertainty. It returns it. Yet uncertainty, when faced consciously, no longer demands domination. It invites creativity. Without gods to absorb fear, fear becomes information. Without rulers to guarantee order, order becomes something co-created rather than imposed. The myths do not disappear. They remain as language, as memory, as art. They still teach, still resonate, still comfort. But they no longer command. They suggest rather than dictate. They become stories rather than structures. Cycles do not end automatically. They require attention. They dissolve when no longer needed. This ending does not promise escape from power, but understanding of it. Understanding changes posture. It softens urgency. It makes room. The audience is left here, not with instruction, but with space to sit. The absence of a final ruler is not chaos. It is openness. A future that does not yet need a name. A story that continues because someone is listening rather than obeying. When gods fall silent, something else begins to speak. Not loudly, not with authority, but with awareness. The story does not conclude. It opens outward, carrying its questions beyond the screen, into memory, into reflection, into choice. Nothing demands belief now. Nothing insists on hierarchy. The universe remains vast, uncertain, unfinished, and within that uncertainty, meaning can still be formed, not handed down from above, but shaped from within. The gods were never the end of the story. They were how the story learned to pause. Now, the pause lifts. What happens next is not written in myth. It waits in perception, in courage, in attention. The screen darkens, but the question remains awake. If power lives where belief gathers, then belief can move. And if belief can move, so can the future. The story continues, not because it must, but because it is now ours to notice, to question, and to shape without needing thunder, to remind us that attention itself is the oldest power of all, still unfolding quietly within us all.